Alan Karpick with Brian Neubert, Saturday night simulcast, I should say, and we're going to hit a little bit of basketball tonight, a little bit of football recruiting this Father's Day weekend, and I want to thank our sponsor, the Union Club Hotel, and the 811 Bistro, Boiler Up Bar, and we appreciate their support. And we appreciate last week at a very good event at the National Football Foundation at the Union Club Hotel. Always great for those types of events as well. Brian, you've had a busy day watching some hoops in Brownsburg, correct?
Brownsburg, yes.
And it's my town, Brownsburg, so to speak, but a place that you've been many times watching. But we'll start a little bit just on with one of the certainly some of the biggest news this week. David Jenkins Jr. committing to Purdue from as a grad transfer from Utah. Really thought you did a good job in the piece of kind of the morning after, so to speak, kind of looking to him, watching some film, making one point very clear about him. And that point is that he's not a point guard, right?
The point being he is not that, yes.
Okay. But really, what I mean, just having a couple of days to look at and think about that, what does Purdue have there?
Well, still not a point guard.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously went into this process looking for a point guard, but also looking for another guard. You really needed a point guard. You really needed somebody who could match up a little bit defensively at the one, especially. They ended up with another scoring guard, another destination type player offensively, the guy you run offense to get shots for, as opposed to the person who facilitates the getting of the shot for that person.
Right.
That's just kind of what it came down to. Purdue recruited a lot of point guards, didn't get any of them. Needed a player. I don't want to say needed a body, because I don't want to be reductive about what David Jenkins Jr. is. Watching him, I think he's a legitimate scoring guard. He's a legitimate shooter. He's another offensive weapon for you. He's just not what you set out to get. You set out to get a point guard. That said, it's not like Purdue doesn't need backcourt scoring either. I think this backcourt is so unproven, and I think that having another guy who can put the ball in the basket here isn't the worst thing in the world, especially when the guys in that role who you're counting on to do that are Brandon Newman, who obviously everybody expects to have a much different season as a junior than he did as a sophomore. But that being said, this is still a guy who was out of the rotation for the majority of the season, and Fletcher Lawyer, who is a freshman, obviously, who's going to have to make the adjustment to Big Ten basketball. David Jenkins Jr., I think, has a lot of physical tools. He's a big and strong kid. I don't know if he's going to wow anyone with his athleticism. That's not what his game is predicated on. He's kind of like the third Johnson brother. Physically, he's very comparable to a Tyrone Johnson. He's a better shooter. He's a different player from Tyrone Johnson, but I think it's more size and strength and savvy, and his ability to use his body more than it is, raw athleticism, quickness, speed, whatever. He's a legitimate 3-point shooter. He's a good 3-point shooter. Obviously he's an older guy. He's an adult now. He's 24, 25 years old. He's well-traveled, having been now being his fourth school. He followed his coach from South Dakota State to UNLV. So there's some circumstance there. It's not like he's been running from something everywhere he's gone, as opposed to running to something. But I think he can help give them some scoring punch. I think he can. His background as a defensive player is not great, but I think he can maybe be a guy Purdue can ask to guard the point a little bit, because he's big and physical and tenacious. I think, from what I understand, he's got quite a personality to him. He's got some energy to him. He's got a big presence about him, and that's something this team can stand to have, because they have a lot of reserved sort of guys. They could use somebody who's gonna talk a lot, who's gonna bring some energy, who's gonna make his presence felt as a personality. And it's a 1-year investment. I don't see any downside to it. The only important point to make here is that Purdue did set out to get a point guard, did not get a point guard. But as I said before, it's not like Purdue can't use another scorer either, because they're very unproven. from a scoring perspective.
Yeah. Do you sense though that may mean some moving things around? I mean, obviously Braden
Yeah,
Smith's in that
sure.
position. Could Ethan Morton, you've written about that. How do you see that? And I know you guys had a chance, not that they're working on that kind of stuff just yet, watch them, but you did get a chance to watch Purdue a little bit, or what was there for Purdue, I should say.
Yeah,
practice
they have half a team right now, if that.
Half the team at best. But
it's
anyway,
hard
I mean, is that a reasonable expectation that Coach Matt Painter and staff could manufacture? I don't know if by committee is the right term, but maybe make some adjustments to get what they need out of that position.
Yeah, well, obviously, freshman Braden Smith's going to get kicked into the deep end of the pool here right away. He's going to have to learn on the job. He's going to have to learn on the fly. I think there is a really significant adjustment that's going to have to be made to the next level for him. But that's true of any freshman, and that's especially true of any freshman point guard.
Right.
And then I think you also you tinker with Ethan Morton probably seeing some time at point guard, especially from an offensive perspective. And then Fletcher Loyer probably the same boat. Both of those guys can be effective offensive half-court point guards, I think. Neither of them are going to change ends, in the blink of an eye like Purdue could do with Jaden Ivey, who wasn't a point guard either, but was a primary ball handler. Neither of those guys, I think, are ideally suited to do what Purdue needs defensively from its point guard, in terms of picking up the ball 94 feet and applying some pressure and trying to throw an offense out of rhythm. Bringing the ball up, Purdue might have to curb some things there in order to make that work. It might also have to cross its matchups some. It might have to have the two guard the one guard the two. Purdue tinkered with that quite a bit when Carson Edwards and Nojel Eastern were at Purdue, where Eastern would bring the ball up on offense, but he would often guard the wing, whereas Carson Edwards, who was smaller and quicker, would get on the ball and guard the point some. So Purdue's going to have to get creative here defensively, probably in order to mask some of the complications that come with the fact that they have one point guard on their roster.
Yeah. Let's look at one comment that you made and wrote about that when watching practice was, and a guy that a lot of people are talking about just because he's about expectations. Trey Kaufman, Wren, stood out to you, but what else, having watched Purdue and its workout, again, a minimized roster at best, but what impressed you most about Trey Kaufman, Wren? I know you've seen him a lot over the years.
Well, he's just transformed his body. He's a big physical kid now, and he really shot the ball well. And those things, in conjunction with him needing to improve his lateral quickness in order to be able to defend a couple of different positions, not only primarily, but in switches and things like that. Those were the three things that really, going into this redshirt year, you had to really hammer away at. And from everything I've gathered about him, he has been that guy that has been really driven in the weight room, really driven, making personal improvements. And I think from an offensive perspective, he's a guy who has become a player who can really, really help you from a scoring perspective right away. You're going to have to figure out ways to get him involved offensively. You're going to have to figure out ways to get him on the floor because you have three really good foremen. Obviously, Caleb First is going to be a little bit interchangeable at the 5 too. So some of his minutes, I think, are going to need to come there, because I think that's that's where his better matchups lie. But I think Trey Kaufman Wren really looks like a guy who's going to help them a lot now and later, because I think he can be a really good player at Purdue, and I think he can be a really, really good player now at Purdue. And that's not to say it's a surprise that, he's come out of the spring looking like this, because obviously this was a kid with a North Carolina offer out of high school who redshirted at Purdue. I mean, this is not your normal recruiting story here. But part of his issue was he had to get better defensively, and Purdue's whole team has to get better defensively. So there's no better time. He fits right in terms of making that adjustment now. But from an offensive perspective, he has a lot going for him. He's a very creative scorer. He can play inside and out. He can score in isolation. I think Purdue is going to when he's on the floor, they're going to have to find ways to get him the ball in positions to score. He might be one of those guys you actually run stuff for too at the 4. And Purdue hasn't had one of those guys since Vince Edwards.
Yeah, going to be fun to watch as the 2022-23 season. We'll be here in a while, but they're already starting some prep for that. That's a 12-month, 365-day endeavor anyway. All right, Purdue football recruiting also this week. Interesting because Purdue's making some hay in the defensive line category. What do you make of that? You talked about Mark Hagan and the job he does at that position, and he is tenacious as a recruiter, and he's tenacious as a football coach too. But just your overall feeling of not only Micah Carter, but Sadiq, and hopefully I'm pronouncing the right, Clemens as well, as a guy that can make a difference.
Yeah, on top of Drake Carlson.
Yeah, Drake Carlson last week. Yeah, right.
Yeah, Purdue got 3 of its A-list guys. That's not to say, they got the very top of their A-list, because there's still a couple of in-state guys, and Josh Mickens and Kendrick Gilbert who are out there too, both of whom are national recruits. So I don't want to make it sound like Purdue got the 3 guys it wanted, because there's still some really good guys out there. Will Helt too at Carmel is another really early target for Purdue, but Purdue got 3 of the better guys on its list for sure. Purdue got 3 guys with good offers from other people. Now, this is the time of the year too, where every kid, starts to find out who really wants them and who doesn't. That always factors into some of these decisions too. So when you just look at their offer lists, that's not always necessarily practical reality. But Purdue obviously won these guys over pretty quick. I had all 3 of them pegged as guys who probably take a bunch of visits and then decide maybe next month. But Purdue got them all locked down on their visits. And I think that's speaks volumes to the momentum Purdue has coming out of a pretty good season last year. B, George Karloftis's success at Purdue is probably resonating with some defensive line recruits. And then 3, as you mentioned before, I think they've got a really good one in Mark Hagan. He's always been a really, really good recruiter, a really persistent, really diligent recruiter who has a real business-like approach about him, yet an uncanny ability to connect with kids too, because sometimes those guys who are so business-like, kind of come off. I don't want to say
he's not all that friendly sometimes. I mean,
it's hard for them to necessarily fill that gap between being their dogged pursuant and being their friend. That balance you have to strike with any recruit. But he does a hell of a job. He's done a hell of a job throughout his career as a recruiter. He did a hell of a job when he was recruiting for Purdue the first time around. When he was at Indiana, he was a pain in Purdue's ass because he was so good recruiting the state. And now he's on the other side of it, and Purdue's better off for it. He got them Joe Strickland.
Right.
Sorry, I've got my Purdue defensive ends confused here. Joe Strickland. Right. He got them Joe Strickland last year. He got them Nick Carraway last year. Obviously, Nick Carraway's probably not even considering Purdue if it's not for Mark Hagan, who had started recruiting him for Texas. So it's not a coincidence that Purdue's getting really good defensive line recruits right around the time they hired a really good defensive line coach.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we're going to switch back to basketball for our last topic of the day. Purdue, the Big Ten announced the 2022-23 conference opponents, and it's always interesting to take a look at. You will not see in Mackey Arena this year in the Big Ten, Michigan, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. But Purdue will not have to go to Illinois, Iowa, and Rutgers. Just you had some bigger points to that, just in terms of where that is and what it means. It's kind of good June content to know that Michigan State obviously will play 2 games this year with Purdue, and Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska, Minnesota, and as Maryland, and of course Indiana. But what's your take? Just the wild west of college basketball, and all of the recruits, or transfers are coming in. It makes it a little bit hard to judge if there's a tremendous advantage for Purdue based on this schedule.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, it sucks for me that they're not going to Rutgers.
I know. I'm
an inordinate amount of time
First thing I
before
saw. Yeah.
it's going to be an inordinate amount of time before I get another really elite bagel, like the respected bagel fair in Indianapolis, who's actually really good. So I shouldn't say that. Bagel Fair does a hell of a job. Should get them to advertise, because we
Yeah,
just gave them
you don't get to go to Michigan either, so that's another one of your favorite. Not for bagels, I don't think. Those Zingermans, you go. What do you do? Yeah. Okay,
that's pretty good. But it sucks for me they're not going to Rutgers from a bagel perspective. But it's that's not a bad thing for Purdue, because the RAC's a really hard place to play. The larger point I was going to make about all of this is, this time of year we sit here and we have a pretty good idea of who's going to be really good and who's not going to be any good. And we can look at it and through that perspective and say, okay, Purdue's got a huge advantage here. They don't have to go here, but they do have to go here, and here. Now let's compare that to what Michigan State has to do. Let's compare that to what Wisconsin has to do. And let's see who got the best of it, because this inevitably affects the Big Ten race. It always affects the Big Ten race. There's no way around it. The home road split is so distinct in the Big Ten that is a huge deal. Now, though, who the hell knows who's good?
Yeah,
because everybody's breaking in new transfers. Who knows? It's really hard to even look at this stuff now and say, how good is Maryland? Hell, if we know they've got a new coach, they've got a bunch of new transfers. How good is Michigan? Well, they've got a bunch of new transfers too. They just lost a bunch of dudes to the NBA. There's no telling. Everybody's going to be so reliant on transfers anymore. And a lot of these teams are going to be really reliant on people who are now making a lot of money, who are playing with people who aren't making as much money. And we don't know how that's going to affect things. Indiana brought in some really high-end freshmen. They brought back Trace Jackson Davis, a case of a player who's going to make more money in college next year than he probably would have playing professionally. How is that all going to work when they probably recruited some of these kids to the prospect of them playing for a Trace Jackson Davis-less Indiana? Trace Jackson Davis and a lot of other guys in Big Ten, Hunter Dickinson, are going to be very well compensated for their time this year. How does that work in the locker room? I guess we'll find out this year, but there's just more variables than ever in the Big Ten. I don't think anybody really expected Wisconsin to come back and do what Wisconsin did last year. So looking at the schedule now with all the variables going on in the Big Ten right now, it's not a typical Big Ten where in 1999, you had a pretty good idea who was on every team and what they were capable of, because you watched them their first 2 or 3 years on campus and you saw teams kind of build together. And now it's kind of a reflection of the way college basketball is going, but there's just more balls in the air now, more variables than ever before. So who knows? So talking about this right now does make for good, conversation, but it's also very empty conversation.
Well, it's interesting too. Like SI.com had last week redid theirs and their top 25. Only 2 Big Ten teams in it. I believe Illinois and Indiana, and both deep into it. But ESPN, and again, whether it's worth the cyber paper that it's written on, so to speak, had Michigan early on. This is back in April. Michigan, Illinois. I think Illinois might have been in that SI also, but Indiana has been in the back end of the top 25. Purdue was in that at that list back in April. So yeah.
Let me ask you a question real quick. Just not for a got you moment. Who is Illinois' best returning player?
You got me. Because who knows? Well, who can you answer that? I'll throw it back at you. Maybe.
I'm going to go with RJ Melendez. I thought he did a good thing. He did a lot of good things off the bench last year. Kofi's gone.
Monte
Williams
right?
is gone.
So, yeah.
Corbello is gone, which I don't know if that makes them worse or better. Trent Frazier's gone.
Yep.
Grandison's gone.
It makes it interesting Illinois to be in there. Coleman Hawkins is back, right?
I don't think so.
Oh, he's now okay. So because he averaged a whopping 6 points.
He was the one who was holding out for more money.
Yeah.
Because remember, he had that weird interview.
Yeah.
Where he said that he met with Underwood and they had a good conversation, but he had to still wait to see how things played out before he could even say he was coming. Like what? Before he could even say he was coming back to Illinois. So he clearly knows that, the kid from Texas Tech they got, who's really good, Terrence Shannon, got paid to go there. They obviously know that, Kofi had a very robust offer on the table to come back. They obviously know that, Sky Clark and his brother got money to come there, and he wanted his money. So there's this weird interview. I can't remember if he came back or not.
But you're right. I mean, that's the case in point right there, is that there's a team that some people have picked, at least in April, were picking. And of course, they weren't sure whether Kofi was coming back in early April.
But why are people putting Illinois in the top 25 when none of the guys that you're basing that ranking on have played a game in an Illinois uniform?
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at here. We're sitting here talking about this in June, and who the hell knows?
Yep.
Terrence Shannon's a good player. Is Terrence Shannon a good player at Illinois? They got somebody else too. They have a couple transfers becoming eligible, which is going to be the nature of Illinois every year. I think it's going to be the nature of Indiana every year. Michigan's going to recruit a lot of transfers now. It's going to be a weird league moving forward.
Yeah, it's going to be very strange. All right. I don't know. I guess I'll wish you a happy Father's Day, because it's Father's Day for you, and we'll do that for Tom Dienhart as well. I know you're working on Miles Colvin stuff from today. Anything from Brownsburg today that's earth-shattering that our folks, at least on the Saturday Simulcast, should know?
Not really. This was the first June evaluation period for scholastic events, so it has to be high school stuff or stuff organized by the high school coaching community, things like that. Obviously there were a bunch of guys there who Purdue's recruiting cannon catchings. Miles Colvin obviously committed to Purdue already. A guy who's getting really interesting to me is Jack Benner. He's kind of a wing from Brownstown Central, who's, probably the closest thing to Dakota Mathias Purdue has recruited since Dakota Mathias.
Yeah.
They got a lot of similarities. I don't know if Benter's that level of shooter, but that is a really high bar. Benner's a really good shooter. He's a really good passer. He's a big, versatile type of guy, one of those offensive lubricant sorts of guys who just make you a better offensive team just by being on the floor, kind of like a Fletcher Lawyer, kind of like a Ryan Klein. But he's much more Mathias than he is those two guys. The problem right now is nobody knows how many scholarships they're going to have ever.
Yeah.
Because when you're really good, you generally have NBA guys on your roster. Everybody is in the portal. Everybody has to consider the possibility someone's going to be in the portal. You just don't know. The good news is, I guess, if you could have gotten Nigel Pack, you obviously would love to have Nigel Pack, but Nigel Pack would have been a multi-year guy for you and would have shut down your 2023 class and then bled over in your 2024 class. Thus, you have no flexibility moving forward in recruiting. Now that you have a one-year guy in Jenkins Jr. and that scholarship turns over right away, you can go over one to sign another guy in 2023 probably, and we'll see what happens. The other dynamic too is this 2024 class. That's the class where Newman, Gillis, Morton,
right,
and I guess Zach-Edey, theoretically, that's your class. Well, all four of those guys would be eligible for their COVID year too. So, are any of these guys going to play an extra year at Purdue? Who knows? So what the hell do you do if you're Purdue? Is Zach-Edey going to be here? Is he going to go to the NBA? We don't know. Is Ethan Morton going to come back for a fifth year on campus? Maybe. Would Brandon Newman and Mason Gillis consider playing college basketball when they were like 27 years old? By staying. That's exaggeration, obviously, but
almost though.
If Mason Gillis played a sixth year, I think he'd be 25 years old. Can you imagine a 25-year-old Mason Gillis in the Big Ten?
Yeah.
That would be like, I don't even know what that would be like, but I wouldn't want to play against 25-year-old Mason Gillis because 21-year-old Mason Gillis is scary enough from a physical perspective.
Yeah. All right, we will wrap this up, Brian. I will again. Happy Father's Day to you. Happy Father's Day to the fathers out there, and the mothers that watch this show as well and have to deal with the fathers. That's another thing, but we appreciate them. We'll be back next week in all likelihood. We always have a little bit of scheduling challenges, but our intent is to do this just about every Saturday, and we've been able to keep up with it. A lot of football recruiting and other things that I'm sure will happen next week as well. So, guy. We'll look forward to that, and also whatever news comes forward for next week. All right, Brian, have a good rest of your evening, and we will look forward to more on the site this week, and as it always comes to bear. So have a good one, Brian. Thanks all to you,
Sure.
and thanks to Union Club Hotel and the 811 Bistro Boiler Up Bar. We appreciate them as well. Good place for Father's Day brunch, but I think you would have had to have your reservations in by now. So good spot, though, to do that as well. So have a great Father's Day all, and thanks again for watching and listening.